Hello, this is Max Deg. Okay, then following on from the resampling video that I did before, this one here is actually just going to get in the API information. So one of the things was we had initially the sensors at minute intervals, or they showed as minute intervals, so they could actually be sampling at 5-minute intervals and then just putting data in, which was the same as whatever the first was, so filling it in from the top or the bottom to fill it in for the other ones. So we actually want it on an hour every hour so we can compare with other data sets. So there's another set of sensors that are running as well. So if we can actually match the two up, then we can start seeing where they're going from. Another thing with the sensors that we're actually doing is when we've got them, what we'll be looking up on, and if we're going to create tables inside an SQL database, is our main primary key that we're going to look up from is based on the date and the time. So we can actually say this plant is growing from this day to this day inside here. What were the environmental conditions from these two data sets, from these two tables, compare from the 1st of June 2020 to, 2022 or whatever, to the 5th of June 2030, and you can see it, and then say also compare the same time in December as well to get the information, to see what the environment's actually doing in the same thing, to see how the plants are performing in different avenues. So we've done the resampling, and Python was great for that. So and then we use Colab to do that. So this API that I'm doing here, I actually did this API second. And it's a lot easier and a lot more sympathetic than the first. This API has a limit of daily calls of 2 million. Is that 2 million? Yeah. And the data access goes quite a way back. So historically, I can go and get data from about 2 or 5 months ago. I actually haven't tried all of that because, in fact, these ones, the sensors are good. They're pretty, they got most of the data in there at all. You don't actually have to fill in any empty cells, which we do in the other one. So that's why that one's a good one to talk about later. So we can go back and reach that information now. In the other one, in the free plan, they only let you go back a certain number of days. And so if suddenly you pass that other day, you can't get that data. So it can be a bit frustrating. So this is why doing these automations is quite important at this point in time. So this one also has a user API key. So the company has got bought this the tools in and stuff like that, and they have a subscription thing that they can get so much API data based on their API key and whatever plan that they've actually got. And this one here is actually very generous as far as what it does. And this sort of frequency of 2 million a day basically says you could have a live dashboard yourself. But in fact, they're offering that service through their app and through their web dashboard page. So you don't really need to do it yourself, but you could if you wanted to. Because it's got that amount of access with the thing that you could actually just measure on 3 different, they've got 3 different ones, or if you had something like 50 different controllers doing a whole lot of different places, a whole lot of different buildings around the place, you might have a whole load, so you might be up trying to get some of these limits. So this one just needs a user API key, but there was a few gotchas that I actually found about these ones. One of them was unit conversion, which we'll talk about. There's also a time difference that we've actually got. A third one is that they actually read in Unix time, and I'll talk about that later. And then also, depending on the controller type, whether it's an environmental one or whether it was one to do with the fluids, as far as the fluids that are being pumped to the plants, you ended up having to send to a different URL. So they had a different endpoint, is what they call them there. So, and then we also wanted to sample at hourly intervals instead of the intervals that we want. Now, the other thing is as well, when I was doing a sampling, I was sending an API call and I said, give me everything from the hour to 2 minutes past the hour. So I was using a 2-minute time window of which to get whatever data in, and I was coming back, some of them were not there, so I actually had to shift that window slightly. So some of them I'm getting data which is a minute before the hour, and other ones I'm getting 4 minutes after the hour. So I've then got to order those to reorganize them. So we've got to shift some of the sampling ones. So this is the string that we need to do. So this is with a curl one, and it's a post. And you can use something like Postman to actually test these out and to do them, and then do it. I was just using Python from straight off the bat really to do that. So this H means it's a header. This is the URL that it's going to, blah, blah, blah. It's a dummy one that I've got into there. It's asking for your API key through there. And then it's asking for the content. So it says, I want the content to be type JSON. So I'm going to send my stuff to you as a JSON, and I want you to return me JSON as well. So here's how it actually looks. So this is the request. So this is what it asks for, and this is what it returns. So we're getting certain bits of data coming back, and a timestamp that's giving you in normal time, and then it also gives you a timestamp in Unix timestamp here as well. So that's basically the string that we can do. Now we can do it in Python, you can do it in JavaScript, you can do it in a lot of other different things as well. But I just found that Python's a great way to do it. So to do the Python query, if we just come back into the thing, we use requests. So this is part of the Python package. It's a library, but it's part of the Python main source file. So you don't have to pip load a new thing for requests. The same with datetime and time. Now, if we just look through here, one of the things which it asks for in the script is it asks for the ID of the controller. So therefore, the owner's key or API key is associated with what controllers they actually have. So their license will actually say, these are the controllers that we're getting information, and once you log in, you can see the information from those controllers. And that API key will let you look at those controllers only. So you've got to make sure you've got the right code for the controllers. Now you might not want them into this direct form or something like that, so that it's actually obvious with anybody looking at this as to how to do it. So what you can do is, there's a couple of ways. Apparently a lot of the people who do the API stuff, what they do is they say they make them environmental variables. So that means it's associated with your computer. So if you just go to your system properties, or actually just come into here and type environmental, or things like that, if you come into environmental values, you can actually create a new variable, and then you can say it's called wing dang dong, and you can give it a code or whatever. So that could be your API key or something. So if you're always doing it for this particular computer, that works fine. Now I'm sort of jumping around between three computers. I'm using the server, so cancel. Oh, it's gone sulky on me. Cancel. And then, so that's one way of doing it. So what I prefer to do is to put it into a separate file. So I've got one here, and this is an example of this one here, where I've actually just got a variable and I give these codes. So these are all dummies through here. So they're just an example of what you can do. So in this one here, this is just called info. The one that I've got is info.tm underscore tm, and it's a .py script. So I'm pulling it in, importing info.underscore tm into this file here, and if I want to call a specific variable like that h1, then I've got to call, I'm calling that h1 variable there, then I can actually I need to do the info underscore tm dot h1, and then it'll call it from that other file through there. So that's how that actually works. So it's a good place to keep all of your codes and your API things, and maybe all your serial numbers and controllers and things like that. Or if there's things that you don't want other people to see, like your email addresses and passwords or something like that, you can put them into another place and then just call them in this way. Now I'm sort of used to doing this when I was doing all the hotkey, and I find it's a way to do, because it's quite easy to transfer that file over if you're doing it onto different computers. So if you're jumping onto different computers, you're not worried about that computer having the environmental variables and another computer not having them. So this is what I run quite good. Now the second thing is, let's just look at what actually goes. We'll run this. Just run the blooming thing, shall we? So we're going to go Control and no, we're going to go Shift and Run. Shift and Run, and it's going to run. Oops! Now it says something. It's got snotty about something. Line 29. Line 29. Oh, I went and did something. There we are. I'll talk about this in an instant here. Now that didn't run because I've said that the name of the file is this bit of a string through here, and then I've got this date run. So the date run there. Now you see there it's between quotes, so you think it would read it as a string. But when it comes down to here, it says, no, we can't do that. So I'm just going to put my 3 back into here again and then just run this, and we'll talk about it later. 3, and then we go save and run, and it's going to start going through, and here it's actually getting those. At the bottom of them, I think, of my requests, as I'm going through them, I've got to print the response text. So it's coming through and it's telling me which one that it's running. Now I've got 3 different controllers, so I'm running to all 3 different ones together. So I'm running to the first one, and I've got a loop, so I'm looping for every hour. So in here it's saying which date and which hour I'm doing, the fact that I've got to go through and do a 24-hour one. So it's going through and reading that. Now for the hour in the range, so it's just doing the loop, and we will look at the string. So what it asks for is, one, it says, where am I going to send this request to? So we need a URL, so we need a web address to actually send it to. The second thing is that we says, what's my stuff going to look like? What's my password, my API key that lets me get into that information, and how do I want that information returned? Now I want it returned as JSON, and this is the payload. So this is written in a JSON format, and so this is why it will accept JSON. So it knows what it's to expect. So inside here, I can put the variables, the different variables of what I'm actually asking through there. So I've got the start time and the finish time. So I do want to talk about date. So now it's actually done it. So we've done that one there, and we've said write it to a file. Now what we've actually said is each of those requests is doing a request for every hour. So this one here, let's get one. This one here is going to one of the Hydra, one of the environments. So that one there is actually doing the API call for 1 hour. So I've got to do that 24 times. Then I've got a second one doing a second. This is the second one's here, and then I've got a third one down here. So I'm doing those. Now, what it returns, if we just get a bit of information through here, I'm just going to grab some of these in the middle. Now I'm just going to grab some of those. It actually sends a line of data back. And you see on the end of all of them now, if I just come into, this is a, no, I don't want that one. I want a JSON to CSV converter. So let's just delete all of that. And we just do a refresh. This converts a JSON file to a CSV file. So if I just go and paste this in here, it says there was an error passing the JSON. If you're sure this JSON is valid, please file an issue. But it's not a valid JSON. Because what it actually needs is the very last line. I need a closed square brackets, and at the very beginning I need an open square brackets. Now it will convert it, but what it's actually spitting out on each line is just the line, and let's just have a look at that part of the code there. When we write this, if we look at our API through there, we've got to discuss time, but at this point in time I want to discuss, it says when we get the response back, it says print the response text. This is what we're seeing down here. So this is what we're getting back, and you see it's got an open and closed curly bracket. So what we say is start a new line. So this is add, or sorry, this is append. So this is open the path of our file that we're going to write to, and we're going to append. And the first thing we do is we're going to create a new line. We're then going to put the response information into there. Then we're going to put a comma in there, and then we're just going to print just to tell us that we've actually gone through that cycle, so we can see how long it takes to actually do that. So we know we don't interrupt the program in the middle of doing it. And then it does that for each hour. So it goes through each one and it starts looping. So let's just look at the loop. So it's going through each of those API calls. So it's calling 1, calling 2, calling 3, looping around next one. So it does it hours. So for 8 hours in range of 24, so from 1 to 24 or from 0 to 23, if the hour is less than 10, so it's a 9 or an 8 or a 7, we actually need 2 digits. So first of all, we change that number to a string, and then we stick a 0 in front of it if it's less than 10. If it's larger than 10, when we actually just take the number, which could be 12 or 13 or 14 or 23, and then we turn it into a string. Because when we come into here, you see all of these items inside here are a string. So when we put these variables in here that we're getting up the top here, whether it's Hydro 1, which is this information through here, we've got to pass them strings. So, and that actually occurs with the data as well. So this is the actual payload. So this is the actual request saying what we want. So we want from Hydro, we want whatever you've got between my start date and my end date. So my start date, I've got to calculate, and then I've got to convert it into a string so that I can put it into this line again. So it's all a bit weird in a way. So the first one here, this one says, here's my date, so I can get my date because I'm getting my date. So a few things which are happening here. First of all, we have this. Now this is in a string format, but then we have to convert it on line 18 here into an actual date time. So if it's a date time, I can add 2 date times together. So I can say, if I add Monday, I can say subtract Friday from Monday, and that will give me 5. So I can start doing sums with them because they're not strings, they're actual date times, such that you can do date time calculations with them. But we've got some issues with some of those. So the first thing that we have with this is with our date time, when we do our start, we get our date time, then we actually get our date time, then we get our hour through here. So we've got our hour and it's got to be in 2 positions. And then we get our minute and when we get our second. And so we add all of that up and then we convert that into a date time. So it then becomes a real date time. Then we have to turn it into a Unix time. When we get it into a Unix time, it comes through as a real number. So it actually has a big number, and then it has a decimal point, and then it has a couple of dots, a couple of zeros after it. So it's suddenly made it into a real number, and then we've got to turn it into an integer so that there's not a decimal point with numbers after it, that we have a integer, and then we can turn it into a string, and then we can use it in that. And for the finished time, we can actually take the start time and add 120 seconds to it to actually make the finish time 2 minutes after the start time. And we can tweak that as we want. So let's just stop there at this point in time and let's just look at Unix timestamp. One of the things that we do, so the actual Unix timestamp is the number of seconds since the 1st of January 1970 at 0 hours. So 0 hours, once you start counting up the seconds, so we've had 1,673,230,123 seconds, 124 or whatever, since then. Now it's done as UTC. Now UTC, I can't remember what it's actually called, but basically it's Greenwich Mean Time. It's where there's 0 time difference. Sorry, it's where 0 is. So it's London, which is Greenwich Mean Time. So I'm in New Zealand, so we're 12.5 or 13 hours ahead. So when we change this to a timestamp, so enter a timestamp, so here's an actual Unix time, or epoch time, it's called a couple of things. The GMT, so Greenwich Mean Time, is Monday the January the 9th. So if I take let's just take that many away. 1, 2, 3, 4. I go to there. So here's a thing that's actually happened, and this is another thing I just want to draw your attention to. I'm here in New Zealand. I'm 13 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time, and I'm on January the 9th. But the timestamp for this one here is January the 8th. So it's a different day. It's yesterday, but it's today here. Or it's today there and it's tomorrow here, depending on which way you do it. It's also got daylight saving. So normally, because we're the other side of the world, we're 12 hours difference, and we're plus 12 hours. And if you've gone via the states around, or so Fiji, I think is maybe on the other side of the date line, they're 12 hours behind. So some of us are 12 hours ahead and some of them are 12 hours behind. You've got this little subtlety through here. So again, we can actually take the human one and change it into a timestamp so that we've got a timestamp. So they're using a timestamp, which is sort of easier to manage because you're just dealing with one unit, which is seconds, rather than years, months, days, hours, minutes, seconds and things. So instead of all that formatting, you can do that. So it's an easy way to do something. Now, why are they doing that? The thing is that this company is in the States, and so their service could be anywhere. But they want a standard time, so they're suddenly saying, oh, you're in there, so from Greenwich Mean Time we've got to add another 2 hours on. So a lot of the times they take any of the information that I've got that's reading on the server, the sensor's being read here, but they then convert it into the time. So they subtract 13 hours off it and suddenly saying, well, no, that's the time which it is over in England at this point in time. So what they can do is they're suddenly saying, this is for a sensor over there, so I can add 13 hours onto it, and then we know that it's reading for the right time of day, etc., etc. Because I don't want suddenly saying you've got full sunlight at midnight. So that's an error I did have. Suddenly all my sun was coming through at the wrong period of time. So there's a whole lot of date manipulation stuff that can really do your head in. So this is one of the things. So what they do is they normalize it and they take all the dates from wherever it comes and they set it back to Greenwich Mean Time, and then they say, oh, and where are you? Okay, then we'll then add 2 hours or subtract 3 hours because you're over here, or you're in Germany, or you're in the States or somewhere like that. So it's a good way to make sure that all your data sets have the same timestamp on them, and then they can all just be compared and adjusted to wherever they go. So although you're actually collecting from a place which is 13 hours ahead, you actually convert it back to what it is in Greenwich Mean Time. So that's the logic behind that. And so here's all these different ways you can do them. So that's one of the reasons why they do that. And to a certain extent, doing things in time. But what it means is, in the previous one, when we actually looked at the information that we got from the sample, here's my sample. In here, we actually had the year, the month, and the day, then the hour, then the minute, then the second. Well, this only went as far as minutes. We didn't go down to seconds and stuff like that. So that goes as far as that. So we had to convert that. And this only has just the day because this is done based on the month. So we had to add the year and the month onto this to actually get our timestamp at the beginning. So there's a lot of messing around trying to get the time in the way that you want. And this I spend an awful lot of energy trying to do. And again, once you get the time with this time and converting strings to date times and stuff like that, you then may have to convert it back to string, like what I'm doing here, because I need the payload or the actual request to actually all be in string form. So although I can get the time in the thing, it'll error out until I do this. So it's very, very time. I found I spend an awful lot of time getting these things out there. So once it actually gets to 3 bits of times, it needs the URL, which I'm getting and I've got hidden in the other file, and that's one dash back too many. I need the URL, I need the payload, and I need the headers. And the headers are just those bits through there. And I've actually just got it on one item there. And inside here, I've got the headers there, and it just pulls that into the one that I actually want. So because it's got my API key in there, and I don't want my API key exposed in this particular code through here. So the next problem that we actually have with this is the data that we're getting back is not in a correct JSON format, because the next thing that we do from this is that we take the JSON file that we've written to and then we convert it into a CSV. So if it's not in the right JSON format, we can't modify it. So to do that, what I've ended up doing was it writes to a file, and then the very beginning we open the file, and this is where we had the issue where we had the date run, and it wouldn't work unless I had this date run 3. And if we look what date run 3 is, it's got this, if I just run this and get the date time, when it converts to the date time, as in it converts it into a proper timestamp, I've then got hours, minutes, seconds. So I've got all of these extra numbers on the end through here that ends up being quite mad. So I end up with something like a number which is like 2023 -07 -01 which you can see here, that part of it through there, and then it has dash, and it goes 00-00- colon 00. So that's what it's trying to put inside here, but that's an actual date number, and I don't want all of these extra bits. So I actually wrote a little function through here which removes the last n, and the n is number 9. So it gets the actual, so this has converted it, this date, sorry, where's my original date run? So this is written like this, and it's got this extra gap in here just because it's a thing. It takes it, it converts it into an actual timestamp. We then convert that timestamp back into a string. And so we now call that S, which we put into our function through here. And it takes the S and it finds the length of the S, which is whatever number this is, and then it subtracts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it only leaves us with this part here, and it converts that into a string so that I can then put it into that part of the file name. So I've got to convert that into here. So it's quite messy as to what it's actually doing there. As I said, it's all these little things that catch you out. It can be quite time consuming just trying to get them all fixed up. So the first thing that we do is that we create the new file, and once we've created the new file name, now the reason why I've got the file name with the date on is so that it's clearly identified as to which day it's actually going and getting that data for. So this one here, we're going to get our new file name, and we're going to do an open brackets, and then we're going to close it again. So we create a new file called Hydro 1 2023-0107, which is the date that we want, and this is the date that we've got here. It's in that format there, but it converts it into this format so that it can be read as a timestamp. And we create this file name, we open it up, we just put a single open bracket in there, and then we close it down again. And we do the same for the other two files when we run these ones through here. So we're making the JSON. So when we look at the JSON, you'll find that at the very top line there's an open thing. And then we go new line, and on the new line we then bring in every single line of data that we're getting from our response coming through. So we then get 23 or 24 of those coming through from 0 up to 2000 and whatever. And we do that. Now, one of the issues which I found, some of the sensors, if we actually just, let's just see if that has that information in there. Now, if you see on this one here, you see the timestamp here. This is supposed to be, you see that one's on the 6th of January at 23:59. Now, it should be reading 0000, and that should be 7th of Jan. But this is reading, this is getting data from 1 minute before or within that minute before, so it's not exactly on the hour. So this particular one for Hydro 1, we're getting it, this is where the data is. When we look at the data coming through on the JSON file for Hydro 2, you see we're getting it 4 minutes past the hour all the time. Because if I try it on the 0, nothing comes through. Now the reason why they do that is that they stagger all of the API when they're sending the data to the server. They don't want to send them all at the exact same second. Otherwise there could be a clash or stuff up. So you want to stagger them. So what they've done is they've staggered the data so that one is maybe 30 seconds before the hour, this one is over 4 minutes past the hour, and then the other one might be 30 seconds past the hour as well. So they're all slightly out of sync, so they don't line up with the 00 on that. So we have to deal with that as well, but we won't really be here. This one here is just focusing on getting this information. We open a file, we put a bracket at the beginning, and then we load up our file all the way through. Now at the very end of the file, after we got our 24 returns of our string of queries coming through, at the very end of those, we've got to somehow not have a comma, but we've got to have a close bracket through there. Now to get rid of that very last comma through there is quite a challenge, because what we end up having to do at the very end of that is that we go and get the file. So after we've had after it's read the 24 lines of data all the way through, we're going to go in there and we're going to read all of the lines. We're going to get the very last line, so that's why it has -1. It says all of the lines, and I want the last one that you've got. So we don't have to count from the beginning. We can actually just say whatever number of the lines were, I want that last one, so it's -1. And then the very last digit, which is a comma, we want to convert that. We want to delete it. We want to make it, just take it away, and then we actually put the close brackets into there. So now what we get returned, if we got that Hydro one through there, so if I just grab that whole bit of data and just go copy, and if I just take that into a formatter and just go V, let's just clean that out down, and we just refresh that, so there's nothing there, and if I go V, it's in perfect format and it comes through. So therefore I can now take that JSON file, because I've now got the little square bracket at the end and the little square bracket at the beginning. It's a properly formatted JSON file that I can then do it. Now, fortunately that it's not a particularly deep JSON file, so I don't actually have to do too much fiddling with it to get those things to actually work. So but that took quite a lot of time to actually just do that. But once you've got the code there and it's running, it'll run. But they're fiddly, very fiddly. So we now have a proper formatted thing. Now I could immediately, instead of actually doing it into here, I could make a data frame and do something with that. But what I actually do is that we start dealing with that file in a different way. And I'll talk about that in the next video. So this is just capturing the things from an API call. So we've got the information in there, but once we've got it, what are we going to do with it? You know, it's in JSON format, and that's not particularly useful as it is. So we're going to have to do some Pythonic things with it and kind of change it, transform it into different things. Like we could actually just take this data here and go select or copy. We could go to a JSON to CSV thing and get the information here and then download the CSV file. But this is actually putting manual steps into the whole process, and what we're trying to do is automate it. So this is a good way of checking to see that everything's working. So these tools are really good, but it's not what our end solution is. Our end solution is to look at some way of automating, getting this converted into a CSV file that we can share with the team, and then we can also upload it into a database, and a remote database. So how do we do that? That'll be part 3 of this videos coming through. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you found that useful.